All right. Well, we want to welcome you all to our fifth installment of our webinar series. Today, we're going to be diving into Savvy IRA Planning for Baby Boomers. Got a lot of great information, and always we know that it can be a lot of information. We all come from different parts in our lives, interactions with retirement accounts, and just want to kind of give you a broad overview of just baseline, IRAs, the different types, some common questions, and then look at a little bit of some distribution strategies and some things to think about as, we plan for our future. So we're just excited to share this detail. And just as a reminder, we do our webinars each month on the last Tuesday of the month. In this case, we had the holiday, so as just an exception, we moved it to Wednesday just to account for folks being out Monday and give ourselves a little bit of grace for the short week. So we thank you for joining us. But just as a reminder, like I said, there'll be the last Tuesday of the month. Next month, we will have another webinar planned, and it'll be on some legacy planning. So we hope that you'll also join us at that time as well. Today, we're going to, like I said, cover some Savvy IRA planning for baby boomers. And, there's a lot of strategies for, accumulating money in retirement, but a lot of times that's where the planning stops. The world's changed quite a bit, and we just want you to kind of know what's out there so that you can take advantage of it, making sure that, you have a good plan, also a good distribution strategy to take advantage of. There are tons of common questions that come up when it relates to IRAs. And just so that we're on the same page, IRA just stands for individual retirement accounts. And you may have asked some of these questions to yourself. It's like, can I still contribute if I'm retired? Or what IRA type is right for me? And, how are they taxed? And what happens when I get to required minimum distribution age? Just a lot of scenarios that typically arise as it pertains to just retirement distribution planning, the taxes, the allocation of funds, just so many different questions that come up. And, we would love to have a conversation with you if you have really specific questions, that pertain to your IRA, what options are available to you. A long time ago, it was pretty simple to plan and prepare for retirement. Many people through their employers would have pensions, which, this day and age have really kind of gone by the wayside. They could also take advantage of Social Security benefits and be pretty set with, what we would consider mailbox money when it comes to just, expected lifelong distributions from those retirement sources. But, there's been a shift in the modern age where companies have traditionally gone away from using pensions. While Social Security is still in play, there's been more of a broader shift to the 401k platform through retirement plans, and basically putting a lot of responsibility on us to save and plan for our retirement. So that comes with obviously a lot more risk, because now that ball is in our court. So it's up to us to be sure that we're saving accordingly over time, to be sure that when, we retire and that paycheck stops, that we've got, enough income to supplement our lifestyle and make sure that we're comfortable throughout our retirement years. And, with that, it just kind of make sure that we want to make, the right decisions because they are critical, and being sure that we plan accordingly for all the things that could come up in our way as we look at that. So more than ever, when it comes to your retirement, we are on our own. So again, we just want to focus on having a good plan and strategy from start to finish. So, one of the things that we've looked at is that, as time has gone on, we've had a lot of advances in technology and medicine. People are living longer. And so as we look at just some of this Social Security mortality table, you can see here that, someone who, is in their 80s all the way up to their hundreds, they can live for a pretty good amount of time as we look at it. And, we just want to make sure, again, that we have enough resources and assets to supplement our retirement, to live longer, and just make sure that, hey, are we going to live? But, someone who's in their 80s right now, there's almost a 94% chance that, that person could live well into their 90s. So as we plan, we want to make sure that, there are sufficient assets available. So with that in mind, as we approach retirement, if you're not already there, we want to beef up our savings and contributions as much as we possibly can to tax favored retirement accounts. Although, contributing at younger ages has a more powerful effect because you have more time compounding, you might not have been able to start, saving the way you would have liked in those earlier years. And we know that, families, especially with young children, there's a lot that we're kind of also making decisions about, paying for daycare, paying for their future, planning for weddings and these kind of things. And, while they're important, we still want to make sure that you take precedence in saving for your own retirement. So, the chances are if you no longer have those expenses as time goes on, we want to try and use those vehicles to kind of make catch ups and just take advantage of some of that, increased discretionary income as things get paid off, as children, get a little bit older and move out of the house. And you might have that extra little bit of income to kind of fund your retirement, whereas maybe in those earlier years of saving and planning that you didn't. And so what we wanted to make sure that we did is just highlight some of these contribution levels that come with the different types of retirement accounts, and just making sure that you're really kind of considering the benefits that come with them. In some instances, contributions might be tax deductible. One of the big draws to using retirement plans, especially something like a 401k through your employer, is that in most cases, we can do pre-tax contributions or post-tax. They both have different tax implications, obviously, but it really just boils down to your personal situation and what type of benefit might be most desirable today. But we're still looking at it from a long-term perspective. So as we look at just like a traditional IRA, individual retirement account, that's just a personal retirement account. So a lot of times when folks work through their job, they have a retirement plan, and depending on where you work, that might be called a 401k, a 403b, 457, and all those alphabet soup plans that we have while we're working. And then in most cases, there's a high probability that throughout our careers, we've changed jobs and gone from one employer to the next. And in many cases, you may have established an IRA and rolled some of those funds over. We'll talk a little bit more about rollovers in just a little bit. Or maybe you're self-employed and you were using that IRA to take advantage of some tax deductions. It just gives us a vehicle where we can save money. And all the while you're putting that money in, you could in theory put in $5,000 into an IRA, and over the course of time, that IRA could grow to 500,000, $1 million. Those numbers are, just respective to maybe what you've invested and saved, and not in the performance of the investment that you utilized. But while it's in those accounts, you're not paying any income taxes on that money while it's growing. So we call that tax deferred growth. And you're basically deferring the growth in the taxes on that until the time comes that you start to withdraw that money. And in which case, when we asked, how are my IRA accounts taxed? Well, that's when we pay income taxes. Is in retirement, once you hit that magic age of 59 and a half, technically you can distribute money from your IRA without penalty. And what happens is that distributed money comes to you into your bank account, and then a tax form gets issued and basically just gets added to your household's income for that particular year. So for 2024, the maximum amount of money that we can put into a traditional IRA is $7,000. If you're over age 50, the IRS allows us to actually put an additional amount. So that's where that 8,000 comes in. They'll let you save an extra $1,000, basically because it's called a catch-up contribution, just to kind of make up for some of that lost time that we alluded to in the prior slide. And the ability to contribute to an IRA is really dependent upon your having earned income. Okay, there's no age limit when it comes to adding to an IRA, but again, we want to make sure that you have some form of compensation. So that would be coming from work through wages, whether that's a W-2 or if you're self-employed or contractor, that could be on 1099. It's just the fact that you have earned income. So that's one of the key things that we want to take into consideration as we look at it, as far as that goes. Okay, so with IRA contributions, they're generally deductible unless you and your spouse have active retirement plans through your employer. They can also not be deductible if your income has if your income's over a certain threshold. So we just want to make sure that, both of those things are in play, considering that whether or not it makes sense to contribute directly to a traditional IRA and whether you will get any tax deduction benefits from doing that. The brother or sister retirement account that also comes up in conversation as we look at the other type of retirement savings account is the Roth IRA. Here, what we're doing is we're not getting any deduction for your contributions because we're funding these accounts with after-tax money. So what we're trying to do is to say, hey, look, I want to, go ahead, pay taxes on the money or income that I've received, and then I'm going to take and make that contribution to the Roth IRA. The benefit is now that, while your contributions have been after tax, the savings still grow tax deferred just as they do in the traditional IRA. But the benefits with the Roth IRA that most people find pretty attractive are that the contributions from your Roth IRA, since you've already paid taxes on them, can be drawn out of the account at any time, at any age, without paying taxes. And it's also penalty free, which is kind of a benefit because it gives us a little bit of a hybrid type of savings account that we can tap into if we really have an emergency. And obviously we don't want to tap into our retirement if we don't have to, but it gives us a little bit of a peace of mind and an outlet, if there is a crazy emergency situation, just knowing that you can get to the aggregate of your contributions at any time without penalties. So long as with the Roth, if we keep the account open for 5 years and we also wait until 59 and a half, the money that you've put in will always be tax-free, but the earnings that have been growing tax-deferred, they can also be drawn out tax-free. So it's one of the rare ways that in this day and age that we can actually get our hands on true tax-free money overall without having to worry about where income taxes are going to be in the future and taking that into consideration. So when we meet those two rules and we have a qualified distribution from a Roth IRA, we still generate a tax form, but the benefit in this case is that money would be non-taxable. And that's a huge benefit as we take into consideration, because if I have $1 million in an IRA and $1 million in a Roth IRA, the Roth IRA in theory is worth a lot more because I could draw out $1 million and pay nothing in income taxes from those distributions, assuming it's a qualified event. Whereas if I pulled that full million as a lump sum out of the traditional IRA, that all will be taxed at that income level that it generates from receiving $1 million plus what other income sources that your household may have. And so, from that standpoint, that's why we look at breaking it up to say, does it make sense, to have one versus the other, which is right for me? And it, like I said, it all depends on each person's specific situation as far as that goes. As far as contributions go with the Roth IRA, it's still capped at the same limits as the traditional IRA. So essentially what we're looking at for 2024 is that a person can literally contribute up to $7,000 if they're under age 50, $8,000 if you're 50 years or older, still have to have earned income or compensation. There is no age limit, and within certain ranges, we look at the taxable income, because in this case, if you do earn over a certain income limit, you're not permitted to contribute to a Roth IRA. Difference here again is that, once you see where single filers can make a full Roth IRA contribution if their income's below 161,000, married couples can take advantage if their income is below 240,000. So again, this is kind of like, if my income is over those levels, I cannot contribute to those in any way, shape, or form, just because I make too much money. The IRA would still kind of be on the table, but in this case, we just look at the benefits of being tax deductible, not tax deductible, and whether I can or cannot contribute and take advantage of this. The good news is that, in most cases, as we still look at retirement plans for those who are employed and working, if you have a 401k, just as an example, through a job, one of the options that they'll always ask you is, do you want to use pre-tax or post-tax Roth or traditional. And if your income is over those limits, you are actually permitted to make Roth contributions within a 401k plan if your income is over those levels, because you are covered by that plan through work. So that's something important to kind of take advantage of and look at it from that standpoint as well. So a lot of times we also have questions that says, maybe we're in a household situation where we have a working spouse and a non-working spouse. So in theory, if we have, a husband and wife, for example, and husband is working full time, maybe considered a breadwinner, and we have a spouse who's staying at home taking care of the family. The employed spouse, because they have earned income, can technically contribute to an IRA on behalf of a non-working spouse. And so again, we call these spousal contributions. And so basically, we want to make sure that, if that's on the table, we're still looking for ways to save and contribute money. We have the ability to do so. It makes a big difference just kind of knowing that that is an option for someone to take advantage of as far as that goes. So, if someone obviously who is over age 50, they can contribute $8,000 a year into, a traditional or a Roth IRA. And the question we would ask is, does it make a difference? And it really does as you start to look at it. So if we used a quick example here and just said, suppose you're 55 years old and you plan to retire at 65, so 10 years later. Kids have flown the coop. You finally had a chance to kind of focus on saving for retirement. And you can make that full $8,000 Roth contribution each year until you retire. Assuming that account that you're investing in makes about 6% a year, by the time you retire, in just that 10-year period, you could probably have more than $100,000 saved up just through contributions and accumulation and growth in that account. And again, just remember, this is a Roth. So if this person were to be in that situation, they would effectively be able to distribute that money at 65 and pay no income taxes on it as well. But again, if you're working or you don't necessarily need to access that money, allowing it to continue to grow can still be in your advantage. So the longer we have to basically allow that to cook and stay in the oven, we can accumulate, more growth, more deferral, and basically a higher level of distribution potentially to take advantage of. So that $8,000 can absolutely make a huge difference. And so that's why we're always kind of looking for avenues to save and making sure that, each dollar is taken advantage of. So if you're still working and you have access to, entire employer retirement plans, you might even be able to do a little bit better because employer plans, unlike the traditional IRA and the Roth IRA, generally allow for us to make a larger contribution amount. So we can save more each year in those accounts. So if we think about them, as a glass of water, it's the difference between having an 8-ounce glass of water or potentially a 30-ounce glass of water. So as we look at the 2024 salary deferral limits for 401k, if you're under age 50, again, that's kind of a magic age, you can defer up to $23,000, whether that will be pre-tax or post-tax, into that retirement plan through your employer. If you're over 50, you can also do an additional or up to $30,500 due to what we call that catch-up contribution. So that same theory and concept that they have for the IRAs applies to the employer-sponsored plans as well. So they give us just a greater vehicle to use to capture savings if we're in a position and we want to make up for some lost time, or later in our careers as we're kind of on the upper end of our pay scale and earning potential, we have more of ability to save and take advantage and plan accordingly for our future. So as we look at what happens when we change careers or we retire, you're going to be faced with some pretty big retirement-based decisions. So what are we going to do with the money that we've accumulated in those employer-sponsored retirement plans? And, in many cases, people typically will choose to roll those funds over from the retirement plan at work to the traditional IRA or to the Roth IRA, mainly because they offer a little bit greater control over your retirement fund. So we've got a little bit more selection in terms of what we can actually invest the money into. But that's not the only options. And, rollovers aren't always just the best move. So you may have up to 6 different options that your employer sponsored plan that can be taken advantage of when you leave work. And you can see them here on the screen. And obviously with each one, they'll have a little bit of some pros and cons that we can consider. But, we just want to illustrate some of the alternatives that are available, and just kind of say, hey, with each unique benefit and drawback, what makes the best, ultimate outcome for me and my situation. And, just kind of having conversations with us is what we kind of can encourage, just to kind of say, hey, look, as we're on the verge of making these decisions, just to help you make informed decisions, as we say, hey, let's find out what's behind door number 1, 2, or 3, and really kind of consider out, what is going to be the ultimate best decision for our family, as we look at those different options that are available. At the beginning of the year, yet generally when we get the new tax law data that kind of says these are the income tax brackets that we would be looking at for the year. And usually the IRS revises the income brackets each year. We usually get a pretty good idea sometime later in the year, around November, December, about what they're going to look like as they kind of post those and make that information available. But as we go down the left side of the table, you can see the different tax brackets that exist, the lowest being 10%, and currently the highest tax bracket is at 37%. If you're married filing jointly, if you're earning over $731,200, single if you're over $609,350. So again, as we talked about, the implications of, doing a lump sum distribution, if you came to the point where you said, hey, I'm going to retire and just, have my 401k or my whole IRA account paid out to me, if that was that scenario that I used previously with $1 million, you could see that, without kind of knowing the tax implications, we could kind of be giving a lot of money away in just terms of taxes. Because again, as you can see, the top tax bracket, again, at 37% on that $1 million, would be a pretty heavy hit in terms of what we'd have to give back to Uncle Sam, and also take away from some of your hard-earned savings. So we want to be a little bit more tactical in terms of making sure that we've got a distribution strategy, whether that be directly from that retirement plan at work or from an IRA, and just making sure that, again, that your different options. But ultimately, as we look at it, anything that's pre-tax or that traditional IRA, Uncle Sam's gonna, be very happy that you saved a great deal of money. But we want to try and minimize the tax burden to you, and make sure that you keep as much of that hard-earned money that you worked hard to save for as long as possible. As we look at, historically, tax rates on future distributions are unknown. So again, we really don't know, 20 years from now, what tax rates will ultimately look like. There's no guarantee that they'll remain the same. And as we look at it, it's kind of hard to argue that, we can't say or not they'll go up or they'll go down, but we can see that over time, when income tax was first introduced in 1913, the top tax rate was only 7%. But within a few years, the top tax rate had already skyrocketed to over 70%, and it's kind of bounced around throughout time. And like I said, as we looked, most recently, that top tax rate is 37%. We do know that effectively at the end of 2025, if no changes are made, they will actually revert back to where they were around 2016, and that would put that top tax rate at actually 39%. So again, tax rates can change based on, the overall approval of where those brackets will sit, what we're going to keep advantage of, and just taking that into consideration as well. Okay. So to make matters a little worse, your IRA withdrawals can also cost you in a lot more ways than adding to your income taxes. They can also cause you to be phased out of itemized deductions. So again, if somebody, doesn't take a standard deduction, maybe they're self-employed or they have a lot of just personal write-offs from gifts to charity, medical expenses, and things like that, they can void some of those personal exemptions and potentially some various tax credits that you might take advantage of. There is potentially a surtax of 3.8% on investment income. And if you take an IRA withdrawal, you might have to include more of your Social Security benefits into your income. It can also affect some of your Medicare Part B premiums. So those are just some of the things to kind of throw into the mix when we take into consideration those large IRA distributions. Obviously, it's your money, you work hard to save it, but we would be amiss if we just didn't kind of say, hey, again, these are the potential minefield that we're navigating if we were to take out a large lump sum of money from a retirement account to pay off a mortgage or buy an investment property or just something significant as far as just large distributions within a single tax year. A lot of questions that we get, down the line is we use that magic age of 59 and a half. Think of that as kind of a green light that the IRS says, hey, look, this is the age in which we will allow you to access your retirement accounts penalty free. On the back end, as we consider a lot of that pre-tax money in 401ks or traditional IRAs, keep in mind that, all the money that you've accumulated there, you've never paid any income taxes on. So, essentially what the IRS is doing is they're kind of incentivizing you to take advantage of that. They're not taxing you along the way. And they're, really glad, but they're saying, hey, look, now that you're getting a little bit older, you actually have to start taking minimum distributions from your retirement accounts each year, irregardless of whether you need the money. And we're happy that you planned well, or maybe you have just different situations where you have pension income, Social Security, and maybe that's just enough. Maybe you've saved well in other investment accounts. That situation is going to come up where based on your age, your birth year, you're going to have to take minimum distributions. And so we want to make sure that we consider that and also don't forget to take them. All right. So as it stands, the age in which RMDs, required minimum distributions, have had to been taken have changed a little bit over time. It used to be age 70 and a half, then it moved to 72. And now currently it begins once you turn 73, where they say age 75. Usually it's after, if you were born in the year 1959 or later, most folks in that ballpark are going to be in the age 75 requirement. And we have to take out those RMDs because, again, the biggest thing to keep in consideration is that if you fail to take an RMD, the IRS will actually tax you a penalty of 25% if you do not take that distribution. Remember, this is a revenue capture for them, so they're kind of making sure that you hold up your end of the deal. And generally, for our clients who have IRAs with us, we do a lot of reporting each year that one just kind of says, hey, look, you're eligible and required to take your distributions beginning this year. So one of the things that we want to do in planning is being sure that, we make you aware of that and figuring out a distribution strategy that fits well to your schedule. And also mainly to make sure that we don't forget and kind of streamline that process to kind of make it just easy so that even if you forget, it's already taken care of. And that's what we're here to help guide with. Okay. The other thing that comes up when it with consideration to required minimum distributions is just kind of giving you a ballpark idea of, what am I going to have to take out? So what we base RMDs on for the upcoming years, they look at the IRA balance. So if you're 73, we're going to kind of look at, what was the year-end balance of the IRA on December 31st of the year prior. And that's going to kind of spill over to what has to be taken in the following year. The other thing that comes into the factor is what's called a life expectancy factor. So in this case, if a person is 73 and they have to take that first year distribution, what we do is we get the year-end value and we divide that lifetime factor of 26.5 into that. And that'll tell us roughly what the RMD would have to be. So, in this case, if on, at the end of 2023, if someone had, $200,000 traditional IRA account, we know that this person's basically going to have to distribute about $8,130. So the other thing we want to highlight, in this case is that, it's not going to be something where you have to pull out 25% or 50% or 100% of that IRA just in that single year. So it just gives a ballpark idea, that, hey, we'll have to take out a little bit, but it's not going to be the whole thing. This isn't a system that's meant to like kill you income tax wise or force your hand into taking one of those gigantic unwanted distributions, as I had mentioned previously. As we look at it just in terms of a breakdown of percentages, this is a really helpful chart to kind of note, just because, again, it gives us an actual percentage rate that we can kind of look at year by year. So, we're not looking at it in terms of lifetime income factors. It's just easier to break it down in terms of percentages. So you can see from age 73 to 90, in order to steer clear of that 25% penalty, we just need to make sure that we take out that percentage of the prior year in end of year value, and that keeps us going. Keep in mind that obviously once you hit that RMD age, we have to take them every year for the rest of our natural lives. And so each year as that, end of the year closes out on December 31st, we'll recalculate it and then process it for the next year. So give or take how the performance of that IRA, taken into account, if it's up or it's down, that could change the amount, obviously, that pays out each and every year. And again, that's why I want to just kind of have a plan with you so that we can keep track of that and make sure that we're all on the same page. In looking at some of the RMD mistakes that we commonly run into, they can get a little bit more complicated, as we've discussed, and with penalties and making a mistake can be pretty severe. With that in mind, let me tell you about some of these common RMD mistakes that people make so that you can try and avoid them. And just remember that, as we say with any Savvy IRA plan, we're here to try to minimize costly mistake. So one mistake people make are incorrectly aggregating their RMDs between different retirement accounts. So just as an example, let's just say you have a 401k and an IRA. So after calculating your required minimum distributions from each account, they come out to 4,000 potentially from a 401k and 3,000 from the IRA, for a grand total of 7,000. So if your IRA is earning a higher rate of return than the 401k in this case, you might be tempted to pull out 7 grand from the 401k and leave your IRA alone. You could say, what's the difference? At the end of the day, with those minimum distributions, the IRS does not care how many IRA accounts that you have. You could have them with multiple brokers or banks or what have you. We still want to make sure that we, take them all into account. So any kind of retirement account, as far as that goes, we just want to lump them all together so that we do know the total amount that has to be distributed. So just to be clear, you can distribute that total amount from any one of those single accounts. So the IRS in that case does not care where the actual RMD comes from. It's just mainly that you get the correct number out. So again, as we look at, does it make sense to take it out of one or the other? While it can be tempting to say, hey, I'll just take it out of one, and it sounds like logical thinking, but, tax rules are anything but logical, and they can prohibit you from doing that. So an RMD from one type of retirement account, like an IRA, can never be taken out of a retirement account like a 401k. And one that we also run to is that, aggregating RMDs between spouses. With retirement accounts, they're generally linked under your social security number. So again, we can't take out, the RMD number from your spouse's account to cover your RMD as overall. You got to make sure that they're kept separate, and we do a specific calculation for each spouse who has retirement assets. So that's the other important thing to note. And a third common RMD mistake is just, again, forgetting to take it all together. It really shouldn't happen, but obviously things can happen. Life happens. Just as a general sense, things can come up where, we just had a whirlwind of things going on. It could be marriage, death, divorce. 1,000 things could come up and keep us preoccupied where it just slipped through the cracks. So, we just don't want you to kind of inadvertently give that extra 25% of that distribution to the IRS in that account. So, okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin, and Kevin's going to talk about some of the Savvy IRA strategies that we have, and just giving you some ideas on taking some distributions and some ideas to consider around that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Josh. So as Josh said, we're going to talk about a couple of different IRA strategies here in regards to all those different types of accounts that Josh just went over. So the first one that we're going to take a look at here is holding off taking your IRA distributions. So the possible benefits, obviously, that could come from that is that you are allowing your IRA funds to grow tax deferred for as long as possible. If you remember that, the main benefit to IRAs is the tax benefits of those. So by keeping your money in there, you're maintaining the tax deferred growth of that for as long as you possibly can. You're also keeping IRA income off of your tax returns for as long as possible. So what that means is you're not inadvertently taking unneeded income earlier than you necessarily need to, and it allows that continued tax deferred growth, as well as avoiding potential side effects of IRA distributions for as long as possible as well. But as we look to some of the potential drawbacks of this, one of the biggest drawbacks of this is that, as your IRA is growing, that also means that Uncle Sam's share is also growing. So, in these instances when some of your accounts are growing, so like, for example, if you were to have a house with a mortgage on it, right? If you had a house that was roughly worth the value of $200,000 and you had a $50,000 mortgage, if the house's value suddenly, increased, let's say it went to 400,000, that doesn't mean that your mortgage is going to increase. So it's a benefit within real estate to have the values of things increase, because Uncle Sam doesn't necessarily take a part of that. But when it comes to your IRAs, it can. So as your IRAs grow, that just means that Uncle Sam is also going to take a portion of that as well from those traditional IRAs that Josh was talking about. Also, you can only hold off taking them for so long, as Josh just talked about with the RMDs, especially at age 73. We know that we have to take out at least a minimum amount each year starting at age 73. So what that means is that if we've held off taking them as long as we can, there's a point to where we are gonna we're gonna have to start taking some. And then IRA distributions in future years may be higher, which may push you into a higher income tax bracket, right? So once we know that we're taking those minimums, or even start taking a little bit more than those minimums during your RMD years, it could push you into a higher income tax bracket without any sort of way of avoiding that. Then the other possible side effects that we may not know, but those things could be, the increase in the amount of Social Security benefits that are become taxable, which we'll talk a little bit more about Social Security and how we plan for that in another strategy here coming up in a second, as well as what it could possibly do to your Medicare premiums. If you're taking Medicare, lots of times if you're taking Social Security and Medicare, then that comes directly out of your check, but those premiums can increase if your income is increasing unexpectedly. So, and then lastly, obviously the future tax rates, we can't always know exactly what they're going to be and when they're going to be, because those rates can change, as Josh alluded to and showed. But if they are higher in future years, that means that you are going to have to end up paying more taxes in future years than you would in current years. So those are the potential fallbacks of that first strategy. So the second strategy that we're going to take a look at, which is fairly common these days, is what's called a Roth IRA conversion, right? So when you have traditional IRAs, you have Roth IRAs. Josh just went over the benefits and pros and cons of each. But when you're doing a Roth conversion, it's basically converting your traditional assets to a Roth IRA. So you can see in this example, Jill is converting 100,000 from her traditional IRA over to her Roth IRA. And so what that means is that she's basically taking on an additional amount of income, so that $100,000 in this example becomes added income for her current tax year. What that also does for her is it puts her in a certain, it'll obviously by increasing her income, it also could potentially look at taking the taxes now versus pushing it off to future years. So when we look at some of the benefits of doing a Roth IRA conversion, so one of the things that we want to always think about is that magical age of 59 and a half, as Josh alluded to earlier. So all distributions from a Roth IRA are tax and penalty free if you have had that Roth for 5 years, as he said, and are at least 59 and a half. So the distributions that come out of that, if you are older, are, as I just said, tax and penalty free. So, who can do Roth conversions. When we look at that, there are limitations to who can contribute to a Roth, as Josh went over. But what's nice about doing a Roth conversion is there are no limitations in terms of who can do it, right? So there's no age limits, there's no income limits, and you're not required to be working. So you can do this either in your working years, you can do it in your later years. It really just depends on the how things are looking for you each current year as you go through things. And these are obviously things that we can certainly help you with when it comes to deciding how much you need to do in terms of conversions, or does it make sense for you to ultimately do one. So some of the things to think about when it comes to doing Roth conversions is that it can provide a hedge against an increase in future tax rates. So like I said, what this allows us to do is take the income in the years that we know what the tax rates are in the years that we're doing it. So with the future tax rates being unknown, this allows us to take those, just go ahead and take it at a rate that we are aware of now. And then it can also help you, manage other costs tied to your income, as I said, so the Social Security benefits as well as the Medicare premiums as well. So it really helps reduce the risk of those rising rates, which, again, we're not exactly sure when they may happen or if they happen, but it's a little bit uncontrollable. So we're able to kind of control some of that for you ahead of time. So the other nice thing about that as well is that Roth IRAs, as Josh talked about, have no required minimum distributions. So whenever any money that you have, again, if you're over 59 and a half and it's been in there at least 5 years, you're able to take it pretty much at any time without any sort of issues from the IRS causing you to take it at a time when you don't necessarily need to, right? So you have full control over it when it comes to a Roth IRA. So you decide when you want to take those distributions, how much you want to take, how often you want to take them. You have complete control over that and flexibility. It also allows your accounts to grow uninterrupted, tax-free for life. So you get that same, tax-deferred growth, but you get the full amount that's in there because you get to take it all tax-free for you because you've already paid taxes on the contributions that you've put in, or the conversions that you've done for yourself. And then the other part that we tend to forget about, but it can play a major part when it comes to estate planning as well, is providing a tax-free inheritance to your heirs. So, if things are still in pre-taxed vehicles, one of the things that we tend to forget about is that we're sort of passing on some of those tax liabilities to our heirs in the event that something were to happen to us. So with Roth IRAs, the nice part about that is we are able to provide some tax-free inheritance to our heirs. So there's a little bit less of a tax burden on them in their years. And, obviously with their incomes as well, that could cause, a whole multitude of issues for them as well that we may not be thinking about when we're doing that. So that's the other nice benefit of Roth IRAs. So in 2018, we'll talk about the tax cuts, and there was what used to be called a Roth recharacterization. So this is one of the potential downsides of doing a Roth IRA conversion, is that you're no longer able to do a recharacterization. And basically what that just means is that you're not able to kind of, if you somewhat make a mistake, if you will, when it comes to maybe taking too much or doing too much of a conversion with your Roth IRAs, you're sort of stuck there, right? So it's one of those things that you want to calculate carefully, and something we will certainly help you with doing if it's something that you're interested in, something that we think may make sense for you. Because as we look to the next slide, Josh, it'll talk about some of those ways that you can get stuck, right? So your tax bill might end up being a little bit higher than you think. Or you accidentally phase yourself, out of some sort of credit that might be available to you within your taxes, or potentially the investments that you had dropped in value after you converted. Or if you just suddenly decided to change your mind, you're unfortunately, after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2018, you're no longer able to really do anything about it. So that could be one of the downsides to doing a Roth conversion. So you want to make sure that you're doing all of your calculations correctly, and you talk with one of your advisors about making sure that you've got all those calculations correct. So you don't want to make one of those mistakes that are something that we can't get reverted back for you. So three three key questions that you want to think about when whether you decide you want to convert or not. So one is, do you have a rough idea of the conversion's impact on your tax bill, right? That's vastly important, and making sure that we're not doing it in years that it's potentially a higher tax bracket year, or whatever the case may be when it comes to your taxes. Or do you also have a plan to pay those resulting taxes? Because there are, obviously, if you decide to do a Roth conversion, you have to figure out how then you're going to pay for that extra income when it comes to your on your tax bill. So something that we can certainly help with as well when you're doing some of those calculations. And then, do you have a reasonable expectation that the benefits of prepaying your taxes will like this, they'll make sense in your overall strategy, right? So you always want to look at the overall strategy of the long-term effects as well. It's not just necessarily the short-term effects of the next, year or two when you're doing Roth conversions. You want to make sure you're talking about the long-term effects of taking some of those, taking on some of those taxes a little bit earlier. So as you can see, the answer should be yes to all of these. So we want to make sure that when we're doing a Roth conversion conversation, that we're talking about all of these different things when it comes to that. So if you were to look at an example, which is a kind of a cool little illustration here. So we know that we're in different tax brackets depending on the income for the year, and that obviously changes whether you're filing single or filing joint. But a nice little example here, it shows if you were in a tax bracket like the 22% tax bracket, as this shows. So anybody for 2024, the 22% tax bracket for anybody filing jointly is between $94,000 and $201,000. So it's a pretty large gap in terms of sizes for the tax brackets. So for this example, if you were to have a joint income of $100,000 in a year, knowing that the 22% tax bracket, you're still in the 22% tax bracket all the way up to $201,000 for that year, that provides you about $100,000 worth of opportunity to potentially look at doing a Roth conversion, and that's where that could make sense. The reason being for that is you know that the 22% tax bracket is the one that you're going to stay in. You also know that the 22% tax bracket is going to be what it is for that year, right? So we did that, like we talked about, not knowing the future year tax brackets. It can play a part in helping you take on some additional income now, but pay some of those taxes at a lower rate than what you would if you were to potentially wait longer. So as you can see with the illustration, it sort of fills up more of your 22% tax bracket bucket for the year. But you know that you're not getting to a point where you're pushing yourself into a higher tax bracket for future, for that year, as well as, just making sure that you're doing the overall strategy that we talk about, which is why having all those conversations are important before you ultimately do make the decision to do some Roth IRA conversions. So the other thing that to think about when it comes to Roth IRA conversions are the hunt for low income years, right? So if you're in a lower income year, it could be a great opportunity to look at a Roth conversion. The reason being for that, similar to the illustration we just saw, is that it can be beneficial to go ahead and pay those taxes in the years that you do have lower income, right? So some common examples are, business owners that have, lower sales than they were expecting for the year. Or business owners with unusually high expenses for the year. If you've got some non-recurring medical bills that were a little bit higher than normal, or after retirement, but you haven't started Social Security or any of your pensions or IRA distributions just yet, it could make sense to do that as well, because you are likely in a lower bracket than you will be when you start, either are required to take Social Security or required to start taking some of those minimum distributions. Those can ultimately push you into a higher bracket. So being able to do those before we make those decisions can help as well. And then some final potential limitations and risks of Roth conversions. Obviously, there is no guarantee that the Roth conversion will achieve the intended results. So there's also no guarantee that the distribution rules won't change. So we always have to keep in mind some of the rule changes that can come about at any point. So obviously having us here is part of our what the conversation that we'll have is making sure we're up to date on all the rules that are available to us and are required of us. And then obviously the amount that is, as we talked about, the amount is converted, is generally added to your income, right? So that is going to increase you for that year. And then the Roth IRA conversions can trigger some of those same side effects that we talked about with the regular distributions with the IRA, traditional IRA as well. And then there is also still no guarantee that the investments will appreciate in the Roth after a conversion, right? So we can never guarantee growth in anything that we do, but obviously we hope that that will be the case in the long run. So, so the third strategy that we'll take a look at is moving retirement money directly versus indirectly. So this is a little bit technical in terms of how, when you decide you want to move things within your retirement accounts, but there's likely an opportunity at some point in your life that you're going to be moving some of your retirement assets around. So there's obviously the two main ways being indirect versus direct. So with indirect rollovers, the distributions are paid to you. So as you can see with the little illustration there is you take some money out of your account, it comes directly to you, but then you're required within a 60-day limit to put all of those assets into your new retirement account. And you're also only able to do this once per year within the IRA rules. But many times there is also a mandatory 20% holding that you'll have to account for as well. So this is stuff that we'll certainly help you with if you're looking to potentially roll over assets. We'll take a look at what makes the most sense for how to best do that. Because the other option that we'll take a look at here is direct rollovers. So direct rollovers are basically what are sent, they are sent directly from your current account to your new accounts, whether that's a 401k to an IRA. That's the most common one, whether it's a 401k, 403b, whatever the case may be, directly into your new IRA. So you see that there's no mandatory withholding. You see that there's no 60-day rule, and you see that you can roll over money from 401ks or 403bs to IRAs as often as needed within your plan. So it's a little bit more direct and it's a little bit easier for you, but just know that there are a couple of different options when it comes to doing those rollovers, which I know Josh had talked about rollovers earlier in the presentation. And as you can see here, so the differences here is instead of getting a check paid to you for yourself, it would have like who the new custodian would be, and it would have for the benefit of you as a direct rollover. So if you've ever done a rollover before, you've probably seen one of these checks because directs are far more common than indirect, but just know that you do have the options to do either one. So the fourth strategy that we're going to talk about is just coordinating your IRA planning with the overall strategy that you have. Because IRA assets are not everything that we have in most cases, right? So we want to make sure that it's a part of the overall retirement strategy, both for yourself as well as your spouse, as well as your children or beneficiaries, whether it's estate planning, whether it's tax planning, whether it's the education planning, for any of those, just so that we want to make sure that the overall financial plan and the financial strategy is working as one, right? So instead of potentially looking at those certain assets as one, you want to make sure you're doing the overall planning. So one of the biggest when it comes to your IRA planning is going to be with Social Security. So, when does it make sense to take Social Security versus when does it make sense to start utilizing your IRA assets, which ultimately plays a part in answering the question of when is it okay for me to be able to retire, right? So lots of things to think about with Social Security is that as we've done, we actually did a Social Security webinar a couple of months back. So if there's specific Social Security questions you want to have, you can go back and look at our webinar replay from that as well. But when it comes to Social Security in regards to your IRA planning, you want to make sure that you are delaying Social Security at the right time or delaying your IRA planning at the right time, so that it's ultimately being the most efficient for you as possible. Because there's different rules and ways around Social Security. Because once you turn on Social Security, it's a sort of one and done situation in most cases. So once you turn it on, you're sort of set. So does it make sense to delay it, or does it make sense to potentially look at using your IRA assets, or does it make sense to potentially working a little bit longer so that you can delay both? Those are different things that we always want to talk about when we're coordinating the two together. And then you can go, yeah. So just kind of like I said, right? So some of the things to think about with withdrawing from an IRA to potentially delay Social Security. So some of the things to think about are, as it says here, the reports have shown that Social Security is often the cheapest annuity that you can buy. So it is one of those things that it is provide a guaranteed income for you for life once you do turn it on. But does it make sense to take it there versus does it make sense to utilize IRA assets ahead of time to delay the guaranteed not only cost of living adjustments, but the benefits of delaying Social Security as well as Social Security being generally more tax efficient than IRA withdrawals. So the taxes are a little bit different on Social Security than they are as income from your IRA distributions. So things that we'll want to take a look at when we're doing the overall planning of your IRA versus Social Security income. So then as we look to the fifth strategy, estate planning, right? So this is a pretty big one when it comes to either family members that they want to have a nice passage of a lot of their assets to either their spouse or their children or whoever the case may be, because we want to make sure that we're doing it not only as efficient as we possibly can for ourselves, but for them as well, right? So with estate planning, it's really important. It's probably one of the more important things that don't get talked about enough is making sure that you're always updating your beneficiaries, right? So a lot of people say, oh, well, I have a will. Well, as you can see, a will doesn't generally control who gets your IRA. It's whoever's listed as your beneficiary. So always updating your beneficiaries, even if if there's nothing new within your lifestyle or nothing has really changed for you, when it comes to your financial plan, it's always important to just call and check in to make sure that your beneficiaries have been updated, because that can cause major problems down the road if your beneficiaries aren't listed the way that we want to within our IRAs. As we look to the next slide, you'll see sort of the different types of IRA beneficiaries. A lot of these have different benefits when it comes to the tax side of things, right? So there are some that are far more tax efficient for you or favorable tax-wise for you versus non. So the non-designated beneficiaries are usually the ones with the worst tax treatment. Whereas the ones that are eligible designated beneficiaries are the most favorable when it comes to tax treatment. But oftentimes in many different cases, there's either not an eligible designated beneficiary because we may at that point not have minors or hopefully are not dealing with any disabled or chronically ill people. But if your spouse isn't around anymore, there are things that are non-eligible designated beneficiaries as well that we can look at in terms of how the tax treatment is built for them in the overall estate planning strategy, because we want to make sure that not only are we being as tax efficient as we possibly can for ourselves, like I said, but we want to make sure that anything that's passed to future generations are also in a place that makes sense for them as well. So with the different types, right, you see that the non-designated beneficiaries, these usually have the shortest amount of time in terms of needing the assets to be distributed. So you see the 5-year rule or the decedent's remaining single life expectancy, depending on the the date. Within the 5-year rule, obviously you want to, all of those assets will need to be distributed within 5 years. So that sort of limits the whoever it is getting passed to in terms of their flexibility with the assets that are there. That's why it's usually the least tax efficient. And Josh, as you go to the next slide, the non-eligible designated beneficiaries are usually the sort of in the middle. They have a little bit more tax favorability than the non-designated beneficiaries, but these are usually either non-spouse beneficiaries if if you aren't married, or if your spouse has passed and now that it's time for you to pass the remainder of the assets to your children. They usually inherit those in what's called the 10-year rule now. This was a little bit different prior to the Secure Act in 2019, but that did update it to where they can't do what's called the stretch rule anymore. We'll talk a little bit more about the stretch rule in a second, but for these specific beneficiaries, they're no longer eligible to have the stretch rule. So any of those assets that they get are required to be distributed within the first 10 years after the year of death. So when we look a little bit more at the stretch rule, as we were talking about, there's going to be for any of those eligible designated beneficiaries. So who are eligible designated beneficiaries, right? You see it on the screen. Spouses are the most common one. So just passing it to your spouse. They are able to stretch it out for their life expectancy. So they have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to the tax requirements or the IRS requirements to take money out of these accounts that they've inherited. But you can also pass it to anyone who is disabled, anyone who's chronically ill, or individuals within 10 years of whoever passed away, their decedent's age. And then IRA owners of minor children, only until they reach their once they're no longer minors, they're eligible for the stretch rule as well up until that date that they are no longer minors. So this provides the most favorable tax treatment, right? And we'd ultimately like to be able to pass our assets in the most favorable tax way possible, but that's not always the case. But if you do have any of these, you want to make sure that those are the ones potentially listed for your beneficiaries. But that's something that you always want to have a conversation with us when it comes to the estate planning aspect of your financial plan and overall plan. So the stretch IRAs I just talked about. Only designated beneficiaries can stretch IRAs over their life expectancy. Which allows them to preserve the tax deferral for as long as possible, or have more strategies revolving around how to take the money out and utilize tax strategies for that. And then it obviously, as you can see, it helps minimize the impact of taxes on those withdrawals, right? So not only do they have this the stretch IRAs that help with providing more assets, but we also have the ability then to how does that affect their current assets that they've been planning for as well, so that the overall strategy makes the most sense for them. And then the last part in terms of beneficiaries are trusts. So trusts can be quite complicated or quite simple depending on how they're written and who they're written for. So you want to make sure that you have it written for the right purpose. So there's many different types of trusts, right? So whether it's written one for a living trust or a non-living trust, or whatever the case may be, you just want to make sure that you're utilizing the trust in the way that makes the most sense for you based on the needs that you have in terms of your estate planning or business planning, if that's the case, because you see it quite often in business planning as well. Just making sure that you're doing what makes the most sense within trusts so that it's ultimately passed in the way that you want to. So also options for spousal IRA beneficiaries. So there is what's called a spousal rollover. They have the option to create this account as their own, or they can keep it and remain as the beneficiary on that type of account. So we're going to look at an example here. So a spousal rollover. So if Mr. Smith's IRA needs to get passed to Mrs. Smith, she moves Mr. Smith's IRA into her own IRA, then those funds are treated as though they were always in her name. So it basically becomes an IRA for Mrs. Smith. But those future distributions can be subject to the 10% penalty and the surviving spouse, if the surviving spouse is not over 59.5. So all of those rules that apply for a normal IRA become that the same for hers in that sense. So in the remain as a beneficiary, the inherited IRA assets are kept in what's called an inherited IRA. So those distributions are not subject to their 10% early withdrawal penalty. And a spousal rollover can always be made once the spouse beneficiary turns 59.5. So can make sense for some younger, if something happens in an earlier stage in life, that can be an option. You just want to make sure that you're doing what makes the most sense in the overall plan. So something you always want to talk about in the event that something like this does occur. So watch out for scams. So IRAs can be targeted by scammers. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention and doing your homework when it comes to making any sort of decisions, right? So the SEC always issues alerts for certain IRA owners that may target scams, and the IRS wants to make sure that you're not you understand that there's possibility out there, so you don't want to be doing anything unnecessarily or doesn't quite make sense. If there's something that you get that you want to talk about when it comes to your IRA, you want to make sure that you're ultimately talking with us to see if it makes sense. If there's anything that seems a little bit weird about it, because we've certainly heard some horror stories just in the day-to-day events that we do of things that have happened with certain people out there that not realizing that they were doing something that was ultimately a scam. So just keep an eye out for those certain situations, and ultimately ask your financial advisor if it's something that doesn't make sense for you. So lastly, we'll finish up here. So we are here to help, right? So we're here to help with any of these questions that you may have, whether it was just the types of accounts and whether they make sense for you in terms of what Josh talked about, or if you have multiple of these accounts, what sort of strategies can make sense, right? So we want to make sure that we're ultimately planning a tax efficient strategy for you. We want to make sure that we're evaluating your employer's plan and determining what rollover options you may have. We always want to take a look as well each year. Does it make sense to look at a Roth conversion for you, or does it not? When it comes to moving your retirement money, right, if it makes sense to do so, let's do it in the most efficient manner possible. And if we are deciding to use our Social Security or our IRA money, when does it make sense to do so? As well as just helping ensure at the end of the day that if you don't utilize all of your assets and we have been efficient and done everything correctly, that we're then ultimately passing it to our beneficiaries and our heirs as well. So this is all a part of the overall financial planning strategy, and it's a very important part. So if you ever have any questions about any of that, feel free to reach out to Josh, myself, anybody else on our Wealth Cycle Advisor team, and we would be happy to answer any of those questions for you, because it plays an important role in a lot of what you do when it comes to retirement. And so we want to make sure you're doing the right things that makes the most sense for you. So with that, that should be the end of our presentation. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A here. But if you don't have any questions, we really appreciate you joining us for our May's monthly webinar series, and we hope that you can certainly join us on future ones as well. You can always look out for any of the replays as well on our website or on our YouTube page. So if you ever want to go back to any particular portion of our webinars to go over some stuff, you're certainly welcome to do that as well. But I don't see any questions that have popped in, so I certainly really appreciate everybody's time, and thanks for joining us today, and we'll hopefully see you guys next month.